For sharpening up mason drill bits, your saddle assembly is going to be in hole 2 on the base plate, and it'll be in hole 2 on the saddle assembly. A little bit of information on your mason drill bit fixture. You have a small bit holder, which will do from 1/4 inch to 3/4 inch diameter bits, and then your large bit holder will do anything over 3/4 of an inch. There's a little bit of a pinhole here that you fit into the fixture so that way it secures it properly so it doesn't move. This is your bit holder tightening knob. This is a stop clamp or a stop gauge, so that way when you switch to sharpening your next flute, you put that against the bit so that way you don't move it in or out or anything. And this is your stop gauge tightening knob. Now we'll set up to sharpen these. You're always going to have your diamond section of your 6-inch top grinding wheel facing away from the motor. You set it up just like you would top grind a saw blade kind of. Now your mason drill bit, there's 2 different styles. One will just have a primary angle, which this one does. There's just one angle to it. Now you might have one that has a primary and a secondary. The secondary is more of a relief angle. It's not too critical. You want to match it up as close as you can, but it's not as exact as your primary angle would be. When you put this bit into your fixture, you want the bit to hang about 1 inch to 1.5 inches over. We'll move the stop gauge out of the way for now. And you want to make sure that when you tighten this down, that your carbide section is going straight across, and your bit holder here is on the flat section of the drill bit. And once you would switch that over 90 degrees or 180 degrees, it will also be on a flat as well. So I'll kind of temporarily set this up. You're going to want to tip your motor to approximately about 20 degrees to start, just for the setting up process. There we go. Loosen your diameter adjusting slide just a little bit, and then you're going to line her up here. So I just have this hand tightened right now, so that way I can bring this in, line it up to here. I want to make contact from the very front leading edge to the back, the outer edge. And I can see that I'm hitting pretty much the whole way, so that's telling me that that's pretty straight. So I'm going to tighten this down. Okay, then I'm going to bring it in here and I'm going to line it up. First I'm going to lock my diameter adjusting slide. I'm going to make in and out movements if I feel necessary. And then I will lock my tool fixture. I'm going to just kind of spin it by hand, make sure I'm making contact at the front and also in the back, which I am. Now, if you were hitting just about towards the tip to about halfway down, but kind of trailing off on the end, that might mean that you aren't perfectly straight there, so you might have to just rotate your bit upwards a little bit to make contact going through the whole entire diamond section. So now I'm just going to take my felt pen, make a little mark here, back my motor up just a fuzz. I'm going to set my front stop so that way I grind the whole entire carbide section, but not fall off the inside edge of the diamond section. Turn my motor on. And I can pretty much see that I'm lined up perfectly. If you were hitting more towards the leading edge, you're going to want to raise your motor up a little bit, but 20 degrees is where this one is set. So now I'm going to give this one probably, depending on how rounded over that edge is, I'm going to give it probably 3-4 grinds to make sure I get a new cutting edge there. see that I removed all the felt pen marking. I can feel that it is sharp. So now I'm going to proceed to grind the second flute. Now to grind the second flute, you're going to want to use your stop gauge here. Go to this side so you can see better. And you want to bring it out so that way your diamond section hits on the stop gauge there. Lock that lever. Then you want to loosen your bit holder. You want to rotate it 180 degrees. Line it up somewhat square there. And tighten it down. Now you don't want to change any of your setup here. I'm going to move this out of the way. You don't want to move the motor in or out or anything like that. You're going to want to get this lined up so that way you can grind this without moving your motor. See, I can see I'm hitting just at the back end but not the front. So that means I got to bring this down a little bit. I'm going to use my stop gauge again. That out of the way. Now making contact again across the whole thing. So I'm going to do, now I gave the other flute 4 grinds, so I'm going to do 4 grinds on this one as well. Again, I can see that I have ground the whole section and it is sharp, and that is pretty much all it takes to sharpen up a mason drill bit. Now if you had a secondary angle on your drill bit, you would just now bring your motor up. It's usually between a 5 and 10 degree, so I would raise it up about 10 degrees, sharpen the secondary angle, then repeat the process of spinning it over and sharpen up the secondary angle on the other flute. We sharpen up insert bits. This fixture is a 2 application fixture. You'll do your insert mill saw teeth. These are going to be steel or carbide. Most times they're going to be just flat right across the top, so your motor quadrant will be left at 0. And you'll slide it into the grooved out section, and you're going to slide it in till like the rounded part right there kind of stops into the fixture right there. So that way every time it's going to insert at the same exact height. This fixture, the clamp slides forward and back. You're going to want it slid back towards the locking screw, so that way, because if you had it forward, it's going to want to kick this down. So you want to definitely be in the back so it hits at the backrest nicely. And then your insert shaper cutters are your other ones that you can do on this fixture. And this one, you want the clamp slid forward so that way you get more clamp space down on the insert shaper cutter, so that way it'll sit nicely in the grooved out section of the fixture. Now when you set this one up, I always keep my saddle assembly in hole 1 on the base plate and hole 2 on the saddle assembly. Now if your insert bit, I'm going to sharpen up the insert bit first. Sometimes they can have an alternate bevel. They're usually going to be sets. So sets of 30, 40, they go into large diameter saws that are usually made for, ripping lumber, things like that. So if you do have some that do have a bevel on it, just adjust your motor angle to accommodate for that angle on the bit. So here I'm going to insert this in, slide it back, and tighten it. Use a 3/16 Allen wrench, tighten it down. You're going to set these up exactly the same way that you would set up the top grind of saw blade. I'm just going to bring it in here. This is a steel bit, so I'm going to use a rubber bond wheel. If you do have a CBN, face style grinding wheel, you can also use that. If it's a carbide one, you're going to want to use a 6-inch diamond wheel. I'm just going to line this up to where I'm going to hit the whole way through along the grinding wheel. First I'm going to lock my diameter adjusting slide. I'm going to make any adjustments that I might need to. Now after you've locked this, if you're hitting more towards the back, and you just have to fine tune something, you can use the motor to either, move it, bring it back to the right to accommodate the angle, or you can bring it to the left to, just switch it minorly. Right there, I got it lined up pretty good, so I'm going to tighten down the fixture now. Then I'm going to felt pen my top section. Just going to see where I'm grinding. I'm going to bring it into the grinding wheel. I'm going to set my front stop so that way I cover the whole entire section of this one because it is steel. That way you get the relief part, because your cutter is going to be about from here to here, but you want to make sure you get that cast behind so it doesn't hit in the future. Bring that forward, turn my motor on. Do a grind there. You can see that I'm hitting from the tip all the way to the back. If you were hitting from your tip to the middle section, you're going to want to just loosen your fixture, rotate it to the left a little bit, and bring your motor in a fuzz to fine tune it. If you're hitting halfway on to the back, you're going to want to do the opposite. You're going to want to bring your motor to the right, swing your fixture to the right, and set that up. That way you don't have to reset up everything. Now you're going to want to just give it a little bit of grind till you get a new cutting surface. You'll probably see just a tiny bit of a burr on there. This one is not in bad shape, so I'll probably give it about 3 grinding passes to get a new edge on there. Now I can see that all my felt pen is off of there, and I can feel that it is very sharp. I'm not going to change any setups. I'm going to loosen my bit, slide my next one in until it pinches in there nicely. Retighten it down, and give the same amount of passes on this one. Then I'm going to remove the bit, and I'm going to sharpen up every one to the set, whether you have 20, 30, or 40 in the set, and sharpen them up all in the same manner. Now, with insert shaper cutters, they're going to be, most times they're going to be steel. They can be carbide. You're going to want to tip your motor up to 90 degrees. There is a locking hole in your motor slide, so you bring it up to 0. You can use the same locking pin as you used to set it on 0. And you're going to want to tighten that down. Now you can see the clamp is offset a little bit to accommodate for both these, so I'm just going to move this and clamp it so that way the clamp hits about center of the bit. It doesn't matter if it hangs over the fixture just a little bit. Now also with this clamp, you're going to want to make sure it has a little bit of a taper to it, just like your joiner and planer knives do. That way, you don't want it riding up, because then it can have your fixture ride up in the air. Just a little small taper. And you're going to want your clamp position forward, so that way you get more surface space to clamp that onto. Set that in there. Lock it in. Then want to keep it somewhat, straight in there. It's not too critical. Again, like everything else, I'm just going to felt pen some of the area here. I just kind of do about a 1/4 inch down and in. And when you grind these, you're going to want to grind them so that way it comes in through the whole profile of the bit, but you don't go into where it's going to, you can see the holes that it connects into their into their cutter head. So I'm going to loosen my fixture here. a little bit. Loosen my slide. Bring my motor down. I'm going to loosen my tensioning knob here so that way I can bring it down a little bit faster. You're going to always want to retighten that back down so that way your motor doesn't slip downward when you are starting to grind as well. Pretty close there. Now I'm going to set my front stop so that way I go stop grinding before I get to that center. I'm just going to bring this in here and adjust it so that way I hit center, nice and centered through the whole entire surface. Lock my slide, lock my fixture. Making adjustments to my front stop. I'm going to tighten my tensioning knob here a little bit. I'm going to bring it down so I'm not quite touching. I'm going to turn my motor on. And just lightly bring the motor down into it till you get a decent grind. And then I'm going to grind it until I remove all that red felt penning and create a new edge. I can see that that's all done. I can see that there is a tiny bit of a burr on here, and I have a new cutting surface. Take that one out. They're always going to be in sets of 2. I'm not going to change any of my setup. Tighten that down, and I'm going to do the same thing here. I run a little edge of marker just to make sure that I get it ground fully. And I'm going to do about 10 grinds because that's what I did on the other one. Now I can see I removed all that. I can see that there is a little bit of burr and created a new edge. If I would have had to do 2 more grinds on this one, I would grind 2 more times and then switch the other one in there and do 2 more grinds on that to keep it in balance. I always kind of look at both of them first, and I'll sharpen the one that looks like it might be, have a little bit more of a rounded edge on it before I do that. Now if you have a carbide one, you'd obviously use a 6-inch diamond wheel. But this one's steel, so you can use the resin bond wheel. When sharpening up hedge trimmers, you're going to want the saddle assembly in hole 1 on the AV-40 base plate and hole 1 of the saddle assembly. You're going to want to mount the blade initially with the with the top side up. On a shorter blade like this, you're going to want to center it in your fixture because you'll be able to, or your tabletop, because you'll be able to sharpen up the whole blade. On longer blades, you're going to want to, have it over to one side, and you're going to be able to sharpen up about 3/4 of it, and then you will be required to move the hedge trimmer over a little bit. Now, let me point out that the saddle assembly can be in hole 1 of the saddle assembly or hole 2. I usually always use hole number 1 because you can always move farther in, but on some of the shorter blades like this one, not it being as wide, you can use hole number 2, but I just prefer hole number 1. So I'll mount it underneath the claps against the backrest here, and I'm just going to center it in there and tighten it down and lock it down. You're going to want your clamps at a little bit of an angle, just like your joiner and planer knife or any kind of clamp mechanism, so that way it pinches down your blade nicely. You're going to want, now a hedge trimmer can vary. It can have anywhere from a 15 degree or a 40 degree. I've pretty much only seen them at 40 and 15, but there are some on 25, things like that. This one is on a 40, so I'm going to bring my motor up to a 40 degree. Now when I sharpen with my motor in the up position, I'm going to want the motor a little bit more to the left. That's going to bring your grinding wheel down farther, so that way you get into the gullet area of this tooth better. Now when you bring your motor up back and lower it, you're going to want it in the back position, and we'll go through that afterwards. So I'm going to raise this up to 40 degrees. Lock it down. And then I want the center of this grinding wheel pretty much in the center of this fixture. So I'm going to just preliminary kind of line this up to a center tooth area, you know, with my tabletop being centered in my fixture. That's going to allow my range to be able to get the front first and last tooth. So loosen my slide, loosen my fixture, bring this in here. This in. Now I'm pretty close here. I just want to make sure that I'm right, so I'm going to slide this over. And now I can see I'm against the backrest, and I'm barely going to have enough room for clearance. So I'm going to just slide this over a little bit and get it pretty close. Now I'll have room that way, and I'm going to have room that way. So now with that being said, I'm going to bring it into a tooth and line it up here. Give a little spin, and I can see that I'm hitting along the whole angle. So now I'm going to first lock my diameter adjusting slide. And I'm going to make sure that I'm in here correctly. Then I'm going to lock my fixture. We did redesign this, so you can just hand lock this and tighten that down. Slide this over, just make sure I can definitely hit that way. So you're going to want to come in here and also set your front stop to where you get into the bottom gullet area to sharpen that. I like to move from the right or the left to the right. Other people like to move left to right. So it's your preference, whichever, you know, makes you feel more comfortable. Turn my motor on. Light grind, and go to the next tube. Now we got those teeth all sharpened. Now next you loosen up your clamps, and you're going to flip your blade upside down to sharpen up the other teeth. Here again, I'm going to center this in there so I can do the whole range at one time. Now I'm going to move my motor in the negative 40 degree position. I'm going to bring it about to center. I'm going to loosen up my knob, and I'm going to bring it backward for one to get me able to lower to a 40 degree and bring it more towards that center of that grinding wheel as well. the motor assembly has to fit in the notch out just like you would, when you're top grinding a steep degree saw blade. Bring this back. And we will have to realign this angle because this tooth is V'd here. To be able to sharpen this side, you're going to have to move that, change your setup. Now I'm at the negative 40-degree position, and I like to bring my motor up as far as I can to the motor plate. Right about there. Now I'm going to loosen my slide, loosen my fixture, and I'm going to line this up here. And we'll be able to see this one a little bit better. Now I also want to do the same thing again, make sure I got my range of motion. You can see how right here I'm not, so I'm going to bring this over. You can see I'm moving the slide over so that way I can get this lined up correctly. And right there I can tell that my angle is pretty much right on, so I'm going to lock my slide. I can still move that there. I like to kind of line up a middle one. Right there. Lock my fixture. I'm just going to double check to make sure I can reach both ends. And I will be able to. Now I want to set my front stop. There. And then I'm going to work from left to right again. Now we have both sides of that hedge trimmer blade sharpened up, and normally there's always going to be two to a set, so when you have your motor in the up position you want to do both blades, and then you're going to want to do both blades with your blade flipped upside down and the motor in the down position. But that's how easy it is to sharpen up a hedge trimmer. You're going to get a nice consistent edge on every single tooth. The Thorvie International slicer fixture, it does have a raised hub here, and you do get a bushing set that accommodates for different arbor sizes. Slicers are going to have a bevel on them. It'll be one-sided, so you can set this fixture up so you use the front side of the wheel or the back side of the wheel depending on which way that angle goes. Because a lot of times the slicers will be flat, but then they'll flare out and have a taper. So that will determine which side of the machine. This is a smaller 8-inch slicer, so we'll be able to, it's pretty much straight, so I can show you both setups for that. You're usually always going to use diagram 4 on the written instructions for the setup on most slicer cutters. Some slicers will have an angle on both sides, and it will require you to set them up both ways and sharpen them up that way. So you take a bushing, put it over the top. Now this fixture rotates. Now these slicers are pretty sharp when they're new, so there is a milled spot in the center shaft here. So you always just hand tighten that down. Don't use a wrench because you don't want to screw up the shaft in there, and that's going to lock your fixture pretty much so it can't move when you're tightening this on. So put your blade on here. going to thread this on. Bring it all the way in. Lock it down slightly. Now you can loosen this and you'll be able to rotate that with ease. Now you'll notice for diagram, right now I'm setting up diagram 3 of the written instructions, so you're going to use hole 2 on the AV-40 base plate and hole 1 of the saddle assembly. You'll notice that the saddle assembly is at a slight angle for setups. Swing this around here. Bring this in here. And we just want to match the taper that's on here to your grinding wheel. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to lock my slide, because then you can still move this to fine tune your adjustment. So I'm going to bring this in here. And I can see that I'm pretty much lined up right now. I would have to make some fine-tune adjustments. You can always take the motor and move it back, swing your fixture in to get more towards the cutting edge. Or if you got to get away from the cutting edge, you can always swing it back and move your fixture in. So now I'm going to lock my fixture down. You're going to want to set your front stop, so you want to bring it so you just barely touch that grinding wheel. Lock your front stop. I like to felt pen everything, so I'll just grab my felt pen and just rotate this one turn so I can see where I'm sharpening. And then when you're sharpening this, you want to you always rotate clockwise. You never want to rotate it counterclockwise. That way your blade's moving up while your grinding wheel's moving down. And you always want to rotate it as you're coming into the wheel. And you always want to rotate as you come off, so you don't get a flat spot in your slicer. So we're going to turn our motor on. I'm going to back it off, and I'm just going to see where I'm sharpening. I can see here that I do have to go more towards my cutting edge. So I'm just going to back my motor up a little bit and swing my tool fixture towards the grinding wheel just a little bit. So first I'm just going to bring this in. I'm going to bring my motor back so I can see about a 1/16 of a gap. Loosen my fixture. Slide it back into my stop and turn it in so I hit the grinding wheel and relock that down. Now I'm just going to make sure that I'm not set too far in. Adjust my front stop just a little bit, and we'll try it again. Now we can see that I'm hitting across the whole edge there, and we can sharpen that up till we see just a tiny bit of a burr along the whole cutting edge there. That all my markings are done, and I can see just a very light burr on there, so I can tell that this is extremely sharp. That's all it takes to sharpen up a meat slicer blade, and now I'll show you how to set up and sharpen it on the other side. Now this is going to be the sharpening demonstration for diagram 4 in the written instructions. You can see that I do have the saddle assembly in hole 1 on the AV-40 base plate and hole 1 of the saddle assembly, and the saddle assembly is now kicked to the left a little bit. Now I did relock that down so that way I can loosen this up. And we're just going to switch this blade around. That way my taper is going in towards the grinding wheel. Tighten slightly. I have to loosen my fixture a little bit. And my slide. Now I'm going to bring this in here, and you're going to do the same thing. You're just going to line it up with this grinding wheel. Like so. First you're going to tighten your slide, then you're going to make any adjustments that you might need. Tighten your fixture. You set your front stop like we did in the previous one. And then you'll always want to felt pen this. I know I'm lined up pretty well. And you're going to do this. Loosen your top knob. Turn the fixture on. Rotate that through until you have a nice little burr, and it'll be really nice and sharp. You do not want to really touch the edge because it is going to be extremely sharp, and you can either remove the burr with a polishing wheel, or I like to use a whetstone. It's a lot easier to just kind of hold it on here and rotate it. When sharpening up hole saws, I like to mark the inside edge of the hole saw, the tooth that I'm going to be starting on, and mark about 4 or 5 teeth so I can see exactly where I am sharpening if I got to make any adjustments. The fixture will mount on top of the 1-inch plug with your 3/8 bolt. It'll thread right in there, and just hand tighten it so that way you can still swing it around to line up the blade properly. Now when mounting it, you loosen your wing nut and remove it. Remove the spring. Remove the center pin and your large washer. You're going to bring the center pin and your tapered cone into your hole saw. Now let me point out that your fixture is included with a large cone, which will be for hole saws that are just over 1 inch in diameter and larger, and it also does have a small cone for sizes 1 inch and below. Now you center that in there, bring it back through the fixture. Or put your large washer on, back through your fixture, followed by your spring, and then install your wing nut. Now you want to tighten your wing nut tight enough so that way the tapered cone sits inside your hole saw, but you don't have any slop or play running through there. Now I can see that a lot of that is removed, but it still moves with ease. Now I'm going to want to loosen my slide, bring back my front stop, and I'm going to line up the hole saw into here. Now before I start out too far, there are going to be 2 different styles of hole saws. This hole saw blade has a rounded tooth design where it swoops in, and there's also a V'd tooth where it'll be V'd inside there. You're going to want to dress your wheel to conform to the hole saw blade itself. You don't have to be 100% accurate because after you sharpen a tooth it's going to kind of go into there, but you want to get it fairly close. That way when you're sharpening, when you bring your tooth into the grinding wheel, it's going to want to kind of self-center it on that design of the grinding wheel. So I'm going to bring it in here. Now when lining up the hole saw, you're going to bring it in so that way you kind of match the angle of that tooth. Now you can swing this hole saw to get the correct angle on that tooth. You can see how it kind of just rotates right in there. I got it lined up right there. First you're going to lock your slide. Then you can make any adjustments. Make sure you're lined up here. Then you're going to tighten your fixture bolt. Now you can still also make little fine-tune adjustments by moving the motor back or forward if you got to rotate the tooth, you know, either way. And right there I can see that I'm lined up nicely, so I'm going to give it a nice little light grind. What I like to do is I like to turn the motor on and then turn it off and give one light test grind. And I can see that I match that angle because I can see where I felt penned and see that it is lined up correctly. Now all you want to do is give a very light grind to each tooth as you're sharpening this. I went around the hole saw and sharpened up every tooth. As I came into the wheel, I like to go in between the tooth and kind of rotate the tooth in, and that will help align it into the contour of the blade itself. Now with this fixture, you can also sharpen up carbide tipped hole saws. Carbide tipped hole saws are going to have somewhere between 3 and 8 teeth usually. Typically the ones that I normally see in my area are going to be 3 teeth. You will set up and sharpen it exactly the same way as you do these, except for you're going to use a diamond grinding wheel and you're going to face grind them only. You're going to want the diamond section facing towards the motor, and you're just going to face grind them, and they're going to turn out really nice. There is also a height adjustment knob, so different diameter hole saws, you can bring it up or down because you want to somewhat stay in the center of the grinding wheel. So you can you can adjust your height to do all different size hole saws.